So tonight, the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, Not Dead Yet, and the National Council on Independent Living gathered representatives of the disability community from across DC to honor and remember disabled people who were murdered by family members or caregivers. We are here to remind the world that those people's lives were not the tragedy, but their murders were. And so we've gathered in honor of those people, in honor of the people that our community has lost.
Tracy Latimer, age 12. Charles Antoine Blay, age 6.
Casey Albury, age 17.
Pierre Pasquale.
Gabriel Brill, age 6. Gabriel, age 20.
Churchy, age
Scarlett
13.
Chen, age 13.
Keisha Victor,
3 years old.
The Judge Rotenberg Center is a facility in Canton, Massachusetts that disability rights advocates have been trying to shut down for well over 30 years now. Students, both children and adults at the Judge Rotenberg Center, are hooked up to contingent electric shock machines, and staff use this as a means of behavior modification, punishing undesirable behaviors through the application of electric shock. This is a practice that wouldn't be considered acceptable for murderers and rapists, but somehow it's considered acceptable for people with disabilities. This is a taxpayer-funded facility. Several states pay to send children to the Judge Rotenberg Center. And you know, it's an absolute travesty. It's torture in the name of treatment.
JRC has developed a highly successful behavior management system. This system includes behavior change procedures designed to eliminate or reduce undesired behaviors while strengthening appropriate behaviors. This system is consistently applied throughout the entire day in classrooms, residences, student activities, and during field trips.
The Judge Rotenberg Center is a residential program that is supposed to be a therapeutic environment for people with disabilities. They use aversive techniques, electric shock, to modify people's behavior. We stopped doing that in the 1960s. It's unethical, and I am shocked that health professionals or education professionals in 2014 would be engaged in something like that. There's clearly a lot of trauma that has happened to the people who have received care there, and it needs to be closed, and we need to end the use of aversive techniques, especially ones that are designed to inflict pain as a form of treatment. That's just wrong.
Occupy the Judge Rotenberg Center, which is a group that we support, organized a large-scale protest outside the Judge Rotenberg Center, and we came very, very close this past year to getting the state of Massachusetts to ban aversives. We managed to pass it through the Massachusetts Senate, through their budget resolution. Unfortunately, the House refused to support it, and the provision was struck in the conference committee. But we have, nonetheless, succeeded in making progress. The Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services has banned contingent electric shock for new students. The problem is that those students who have been in the Judge Rotenberg Center for years are still subject to this abusive practice, and it's not enough for us that this should die out slowly. This is, in every sense of the term, torture. It's been referred to as such by the United Nations. It's been clearly seen as such by disability rights advocates for decades, and we are not going to stop until this place is shut down. That is the humane thing to do, that is the right thing to do, that is the just thing to do, and that is what will happen.
I think there are important parallels between the gay rights movement and the autism rights movement, the disability rights movement. You know, first of all, if you look at where was public discourse on homosexuality 60 or 70 years ago?
When Jimmy got out, the stranger gave him a friendly pat. Then he told him he'd see him again, as he always drove by the park on his way home.
It was all centered around, you know, this is a disease, how do we cure it? These people are sick, we don't want them with us. How can we, you know, where can we put them where they'll be away from us? And how can we make them be like we are instead of like they are? And that's where the discourse is on autism now. You know, how do we cure it? How can we make it go away? You know, of course, people giving electric shocks to autistic people to make them act not autistic, that same thing was done to gay people. There was electronic aversive therapy for, you know, people having same-sex desires. There are still people out there actually claiming that they can cure people of gayness, but no one believes them. Whereas there are a lot of people who are willing to believe, who are desperate to believe, that you can cure autism. I point to the trajectory of gayness as being thought of as a cure thing, a disease thing, to being thought of as a rights thing, in the hopes that autism is going to go that same way. That we're, you know, when I go up to someone and I say, hey, instead of thinking about autism as something that needs to be cured, how about you think of us as a group that needs civil rights? That blows some people's minds, but maybe in another couple decades it won't.
Gay people need other gay people in order to be gay. When you're gay, you want to have a relationship with somebody of the same gender. And if you're autistic, you don't necessarily need to be around autistic people. In fact, it's probably easiest to be autistic by yourself. In the gay rights movement, we are really dealing with people thinking that we are immoral, and just for being gay, like gay itself is immoral. And I don't know if the disability rights movement generally is a better model for us, or if the gay rights model is a better model for us.
I think that politicians need to, and organisations working with people on the autistic spectrum and their families, need to appreciate that autism is a part of someone. It's not something you can just pull off, you know, like you can't take it off like you can take your coat off. You know, autism is part of an individual person, and that's really important because, you know, you shouldn't just be looking at it like a disease or an illness, because autism isn't a disease or illness. Granted that it is in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the big book of diagnoses for psychologists and psychiatrists, but that's just about getting diagnosed. But that's just giving a name to who you are and helping you to access different services.
Autism Speaks is the world's largest autism science and advocacy organization. I know, I'm a little cold, sorry about that. And sleepy. Autism Speaks has made enormous strides, committing over $180 million to research and developing innovative new resources for families, because 1 in 88 children cannot wait.
in England, when we have events that are about autism, they're inclusive for people on the autistic spectrum. Well, this event isn't inclusive. This event is really loud, and there's no quiet space, and there's no clear signage, and there's no timetable to tell you what's going to happen. It's not autism friendly. Why would you have an event to help people on the autistic spectrum when it's so un-autism friendly?
From the Autistic Self Advocacy Network for Autistic Adults, Judge, hear what we have to say? No. What is it? Hi, for Autistic Adults, would you like to hear what we have to say? From the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. Hi. You're amazing.
We're protesting Autism Speaks because we feel that the money that they take out of the communities and the lack of representation of autistic people is detrimental to all autistic people everywhere, even including the kids here in this community. In 2010, the money that was raised here was $750,000. Last year, in the form of grants back to this community, only $20,000 came back. So for every dollar, only 2.6 cents actually came back to helping autistic people here in this community. The reason parents are here today is because they're wanting to help their kids. It's not because they're dead set on who is helping them, just getting help in general. When you look at their family service and their budget altogether, only 4% of their entire budget goes back to helping people. Most parents and most people want to help the people that are here and now.
I was reading things that seemed to be like my life as opposed to somebody else's, and so it just didn't make sense to me that it would be seen as such a horrible thing. So I typed autism in my search engine, and immediately, of course, I found Autism Speaks, all the hits. So I thought, well, this is probably good, and I started reading, and I immediately was horrified because the things about autism were so negative. What was there before Autism Speaks? Autism societies, local autism societies, the National Autism Society, the ARC. There were all smaller groups that weren't, really small, but not as big and well-funded, and with links to the media as Autism Speaks. And people would put money to the local autism society, and they still do somewhat, and the autism societies would have programming.
What led me to start ThoughtCast was not finding the autism media that I wanted. It was just like I wanted something that would be similar to resources that I have as a gay guy, that where it collects news about gay people and sort of has the perspective of that. And I really wasn't finding that. I wanted something for myself. Part of it was in 2009, Autism Speaks released a video called I Am Autism.
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live.
First of all, the methodology by which it was created was upsetting. They called for families to submit video of themselves and of their autistic kids. They called for a series of videos, of shots where the kid would be by themselves, and then a series of shots where the kid would be with the family. That was really the impulse to start ThoughtCast. I made a video parodying that, and I wanted to have something to support it.
I'm autistic, I can speak. My voice is different, not weak. And if you listened, you would know my mind's the same. I'm grateful that you don't ignore me, but you cannot speak for me. So let me on your board or change your name. Oh yes, I am odd, and that difference causes pain. That doesn't make you God, that doesn't make you sane. I'm your equal in my humanity. I am smart, I am sensitive.
Well, as you know, we have some very real problems with Autism Speaks. This is an organization that operates more like a large corporation trying to increase its bottom line than a nonprofit attempting to serve the autism and autistic communities. Autism Speaks talks about us without us. They still have no autistic people on their board of directors. They put a single autistic person on an advisory board, and they said, well, you know, we've dealt with the representation issue, go home. It's ridiculous. It's tokenism in its clearest form, and it's not something we're going to fall for. Only 4 cents on every dollar that's donated to Autism Speaks goes to services for individuals and families. Autism Speaks takes tremendous amounts of money away from local communities. And beyond that, Autism Speaks has a very clear and ongoing history of using fear and stigma to try and raise money.
I think someone at my friend's school has this thing called autism. My friend's brother's son has autism. My neighbor's son has autism. My son has autism.
Autism is getting closer to home. Today,
I think it's really hard to bust through autism stereotypes in the media because the only ones we get shown are ones that are based on either exceptionalism or pity or various ways of making autistic people different. And I think that people have a hard time accepting the concept of diversity in general, but especially neurodiversity. I think the stories of regular autistic people don't sell books, don't create headlines, they don't get people up out of their seats. And I think that's the case with just about any situation. I mean, we're in such a soundbite, media phase right now. It's hard to get people don't necessarily want to hear the stories of people who are just getting through their days and who just deserve support and who just need more understanding.
I work through my department and through collaborations with autistic people, people with disabilities, and community agencies to help build the healthcare system to serve people with developmental disabilities in much more robust ways, to build the infrastructure beneath the supports so that people can thrive in the community.
One of the issues that we're facing as advocates with developmental disabilities is that people often overlook us when they're trying to find allies in policy making. But then when it comes to disability, people tend to forget that it's the people with disabilities that have the most authentic perspective and the best understanding of how things will influence us.
I care deeply about this. I think we have made progress. I think we can make more. All of you have terrific suggestions. I'm going to tell you, I think maybe one of the most powerful suggestions was Zoe's point, which is self-advocacy. 2, 3, right now.
This past spring, I organized a protest of an Autism Speaks walk. Now, these walks are one of the many ways that they acquire their ginormous budget. They essentially, if you've done AIDS Walk, it's a similar thing. They have their supporters in local communities go around, ask people for money, do fundraising, and then this walk is sort of to celebrate it, and they're pledging to walk around in a circle in exchange for getting the money. Lots of organizations have walks. But with Autism Speaks, it makes me really sad because people will be giving their money, working so hard, to raise money and then giving their money and the money of people in their community to this national organization, which they believe is going to come back and help them in some way and help autistic people. Often it's parents raising money in the hope that it'll help their children. But then what this organization does is, if you look at where the money is spent, it's not spent on services for families like the families that raise the money. It's spent on advertising, essentially advertising the organization, on the frankly ginormous salaries of the heads of the organization, and on research to make autistic people like the children in those families never be born again. It was a really small group of us there. It was me and my dad and a couple of Autistic Self Advocates. And we showed up with signs and flyers telling people more information about Autism Speaks. You know, breaking down how they spend their money and talking about how we don't like the way they talk about autism, how we're not represented in their board of directors, or really anywhere in their organization.
All the money being raised today, $350,000, is about what it would take to pay one salary. The salary of Autism Speaks' Chief Science Officer, Jerry Dawson. So Jerry sends all these people heartfelt thanks, who put in all this work just to make sure that she can live like a 1%er.
And we had a little table that we had our flyers on, and immediately the regional director of Autism Speaks, based in LA, comes up to us and says, "You have to leave." And we said, "Oh, this is a public park, you know, why do we have to leave?" And he said, "We had vendors pay in advance to be here." You know, there were vendors like people who do autism services advertising their services. And he said, the vendors paid to be here, so if you want to be here, you have to pay too. And I think he wanted us to believe that it was illegal for us to be there. You know, without actually directly lying to us, he was trying to trick us into thinking that. So eventually we said to him, is it illegal for us to be here in this public park with a small table and some flyers, or do you just not want us to? Are you threatening to have us arrested? Or are you just asking us to go? And he said, I'm asking you to go. And I said, we refuse to go, there's nothing more to talk about. So he left. Police came. They said, what are you doing here? We said, we're handing out flyers. And we have some signs. Look, would you like to see our signs? Would you like to read our flyers? And we weren't doing anything illegal, of course. We were standing in a public park with a table and some pieces of paper.
And you had a permit to protest.
We did have a permit to protest. I had filled out a permit with the San Jose Police Department. I had it with me. I showed it to the Autism Speaks regional director. I showed it to the police. They examined it. They gave it back to me. They said, you're doing nothing illegal. Just don't threaten anyone or block anyone's path. I said, we're not here to hurt anyone. We just want to have our voice heard. They left. But I really feel like when protesters show up at these things, you know, Autism Speaks, whose slogan, by the way, is it's time to listen. Instead of listening to what we have to say, they try and intimidate us into leaving, and they try to silence our opinions because they don't want people to know that essentially that there are other options. They don't want people to know that there's other groups out there doing advocacy work for autism, and that some of them are run by autistic people who are angry about the way Autism Speaks does its business.
So the Autistic Self Advocacy Network was founded in 2006 by Scott Robertson and I. You know, we felt like there was this huge and expanding societal conversation about autism that was involving everyone except autistic people ourselves. And we discovered that there were many other autistic people who felt that way. So we decided that rather than take the route that had seemed to be typical for self-advocates in the autism world in the past, which was to, go on the conference circuit or write a book or things of that nature, we were going to found an organization, and there was a need to create a mechanism for collective action for the autistic adult community so that we would be represented politically in the same way that any other minority group was.
Autism steals. Autism leaves an empty shell. Autism is no hope, no future. These aren't facts, these are myths. I'm an autistic person, and the national conversation about autism is happening without us. This has to change.
Autism is an integral part of who I am and how I see the world. I've embraced it, and it has made me stronger. I am a mom, a wife, a writer, social worker, and activist.
People need to treat me with respect because I have autism, but I am still a person first.
My brain may work a little different, but that makes me good at a lot of things. I'm a musician, mathematician, and scholar. With support, I can do anything anybody else can do, even if it isn't in the same way.
Our futures have not been stolen. Our lives are not tragedies.
You must hear our voices.
Leave the old stereotypes behind.
It was a gestalt. I was a classroom teacher for a very long time, and I worked with a lot of autistic kids, although I was a regular ed teacher. I taught English, social studies, but I tended to be the teacher that, you know, when the kids were mainstreamed, I had a lot of the kids who were mainstream. And I reached a point where things weren't connecting for me, and I think for me, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I went through a lot of my life sort of looking outside myself and thinking if I found the right situation, if I was in the right place, if I was in the right, that things would sort of fall into place and I would be comfortable and secure. I was married to a woman for a long time. I was sort of getting myself into a situation where I was comfortable with my sexual orientation. Took until I was 40-ish. And a lot of the discomfort in myself that I thought had to do with being uncomfortable with being gay and sexual orientation things, turned out really when I thought of myself through the lens that I saw my students. That was me. It really wasn't things that had to do with sexual orientation. It was things that had to do with neurological difference.
How I discovered my autism is a difficult question to answer. If you want to talk about knowing that I was different from other people, I think there was a moment in like second grade where I was sitting on the playground thinking about some really important question like why were there dinosaurs and now there's us, and like being confused. And then I sort of looked around the playground and I saw, oh, everyone is sitting with someone else and I'm not. And I kind of felt weird about that, like not that I was sad that I wasn't with someone else because I was happy thinking about dinosaurs, but I was confused, like what are they all doing then? And so I sort of felt like there's something off here, like there's something that other people are doing that I don't get. But I didn't know that was like why that was. I just sort of thought we weren't synced up in some way, me and the other kids my age. And then the feeling of being not synced up kind of characterized my being a kid. And then one day when I was around 9, my mom sat me down and said, you know how you feel different from other people? And I said, yes. And she said, well, there's a reason for that, and you have a disability. And I think she said it was called PDD, which is one of the diagnoses that I got. And then later I learned that autism is another name for that. Yeah, that's sort of how I found out that I had a diagnosis.
I was quite a lonely child, but I spent quite a lot of time without friends or without kind of stereotypical friends, in terms of that I didn't really understand how relationships built up. So I didn't kind of understand that you built trust over a period of time. I got bullied a lot when I was at school. I was always very scared of the future, and I was really lucky that I have parents who have always loved and accepted me for who I was, and I'm somebody who has a lot of different challenges, and I can understand that, you know, that would be hard for a parent, but they've always loved and accepted me and stuck by me, and that's been really beneficial. But I was always worried from quite a young age what would happen if they died. I was always concerned about that. then in my teenage years, so I went through all the same stuff that teenagers typically go through, but as someone on the autistic spectrum, I experience life in a really extreme way quite often. It's as if the volume has been turned up, so whether it be through my senses or emotionally, and so I find that that can be really overwhelming. And certainly as a teenager, it was hard to understand all the different things that were going on and the different choices that I had to make. And it wasn't really until my late teens when I found that I was good at teaching people about autism that I really found something that I could build into a career.
We were diagnosed within the same year of each other. He was in April of 2007, he in May of 2008, and then I was in July of 2008. So we all got diagnosed like one right after the other. It finally made sense, and honestly, the autism had to come from somewhere. I had 2 children who were autistic as well at that point.
I was diagnosed when I was 12, and I was told shortly after I was diagnosed, and actually for many years beforehand I had been sort of bounced from one diagnosis to another. So initially it was sort of just another word, but you know, as I got a little bit older, it turned out to be a word that made sense and connected me with other people who were also autistic and who had similar experiences. But you know, it was also I think a word that caused me to start thinking critically about some of the politics of disability, because everything that I read about autism could be fit into one of 2 categories. You know, things that were written about us that I didn't really identify with, and often I had some big problems with, and then things that were being written by us, which I did identify with, but you know, it seemed like a lot of people were much less interested in hearing. So I started to think from a very early age after being diagnosed that there was a need to change the conversation.
Rami was diagnosed with autism when he was about age 3. He's the joy of my life. He loves swimming, he loves nature, he loves running and climbing. We have an enormously good time together. Rami also has significant challenges. He is someone who needs help with all of his activities of daily living. He speaks a little bit, but he's hard to understand and it's very limited.
We are seeing places like California and other states like Florida. And south of Florida, near Bermuda, is where this triangle is located. So that is a noun, which is a place. It is a triangle place. So are we talking about a square, S-Q-U-A-R-E, or are we talking about a triangle, T-R-A-N-G-L-E? Are we talking about a square or a triangle?
Right there.
That's right, it is a triangle. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a triangle.
We do use some other ways to communicate, both non-verbally and using technology, like using a voice output box. And we're starting to work on rapid prompt method, which is a way of learning how to communicate using a letterboard. Seeing the world through Rami's eyes has been amazing. Rami teaches me about wonder, awe, joy, and pride. Rami's experiences are raw and real. They help me to notice things that I normally wouldn't notice. The pattern of the pattern of wind through leaves, for example, the sparkles in sand. He shows me things that I would just pass by, and I appreciate that so much. And the depth of his love is so pure and deep. it's really an awesome experience to be truly in love with an autistic child.
I want people to understand autism because they have autistic friends and coworkers and neighbors. Inclusion really is the only way that we're going to be making the progress that we seek. And that's very hard. It's very hard because, as we see with any other minority group, there's this long and winding road we have to go down where people don't understand. And in order to help them understand, we often have to go through a lot of really unpleasant stuff. For many years, people's main vision of autism came from the movie Rain Man. And there were some very clear stereotypes emerging out from that. Beyond that, I think the biggest problem with the movie Rain Man is they put the guy in an institution at the end, which sends a horrible message. It reinforces this idea that people with disabilities should be segregated. Today, I think we have different problems. I think television suffers from what you might refer to as very special episode syndrome. And very special episode syndrome, you might be familiar with it. It's when a TV show contracts a disabled character for an episode. And usually after, a week or two, the show manages to kick the problem. Typically after the disabled character has taught all the non-disabled characters a very valuable lesson before going back to the institution or segregated school where we all presumably belong. So, I think the media has a real degree of responsibility that they haven't owned up to for the problems and prejudice and segregation that autistic people and people with other disabilities face in our society. So part of what we have to do is we need to fix that.
I understand why there are negative autism myths, because media campaigns about autism are relentlessly negative. They have to do with cures, they have to do with autistic people being different or overcoming adversity. And I think most people don't understand that autistic people have always been here. They're part of our community. Whatever their ability levels are, they're all human beings, and people like my son deserve to be part of our community just as much as anybody else. And the internet has made it so those stories are getting out, and autistic people themselves are speaking their minds as well. And I think though, even though the headlines still tend to be about pity and fear and super crip kind of hero stories, that's not reality. And if people look past the headlines and into the blogs and into the advocacy area, they're going to see the real stories of people with autism. So what we need to do is amplify those and get more of those out.
We don't need to have one big organization dictating and then all the little organizations hoping they don't make them mad so that maybe they'll get a grant. And I've known people who say, well, if we say something against them, we're not going to get anything from them. Whereas if they hadn't come into your community and taken out $100,000, you would have $100,000 to put into something in your community that you could decide what best befits your community with that money. And there it goes over to Autism Speaks, and then you have to apply for a grant and hope you get the grant to get some of your money back. We started a toolkit idea, what's called the Toolkit of Resources from the Autistic Community. And we put a lot of, if you think you are about to harm somebody, there are numbers you can call here if you need assistance. We got as many resources. Some of them were developed by autistic people. Some of them were government resources.
not sure exactly what, I would like this to be a conversation. You know, I don't want to be me up here talking to you guys tonight, so I'm hoping we get just a lot of conversation going. I'd like to suggest a couple of ground rules though, just sort of like, because the feelings can be so strong and hot about some of these issues, and we all acknowledge that the feelings are really strong in many cases. But for the purposes of discussion, and I think for the purposes of being effective as an organization down the line, maybe we can cultivate a little bit of patience with each other and with other people who aren't present and have compassionate views. So yes?
What does that look like? What do you mean, cultivate patience?
That means don't yell at each other. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Autism wars. Okay, there's no official autism war, but there is kind of an implicit and often acknowledged conflict in the wider autism community. Conflict between families severely impacted by childhood autism on the one end of the spectrum, and then adults who are relatively functioning verbal on the other end. And maybe that's not on the other end of the spectrum, but these are the self-advocating adults. This is a big pot of money. This is the federal budget for autism. And the question is, how is it going to be divided up? Is it going to? What are the ways? And this, I think, is where a lot of the war comes from. How is this pot going to be divided up? Okay. Yes.
Okay, first of all, the circle needs to get bigger, and the circle would get bigger if our government spent money.
I didn't tell you how big the circle was.
Okay.
Yeah.
At some point,
However big it is, it's
higher. The circle is so big at this point, and it needs to be bigger, and it would be bigger if we had a government that, you know, didn't think like socialism and taking care of people and providing services to people was a dirty word. We'd have a bigger circle if our government spent less money on like wars and stuff.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
You know, tax breaks for millionaires, we'd have a bigger circle. So that's something to consider. Another thing is, I don't know why everyone acts like what autistic advocates want is to take money away from families, because we don't want that. Like, I don't understand why there is this war, you know, except for the people are so obsessed with the idea of eradicating autism, because what do we want that's bad for people who are severely affected? We want an end to restraint, seclusion in schools, we want an end to institutionalization, so guys like Kenny, who you talked about, would have a better living situation that wasn't so restrictive and there wasn't such a high potential for abuse. We want acceptance so that no one is stared at and made fun of and mocked wherever they go. We want an end to hate crimes, like people who are severely affected are often, you know, victimized by hate crimes. We don't like want, what we want is going to be good for everyone on the autism spectrum. So I don't understand why so many parents oppose us, except that they hate that their children are autistic and we don't mind it.
Now, I've known people with cerebral palsy, and they are 100% human beings. Love them, care for them, give them all the support I can, believe in spending tax dollars to help them out, and yet I concede that there's an element of disorder and disease to cerebral palsy. Is autism that way, or is autism something different from that?
I'm sure that at least some people with cerebral palsy are also autistic.
Okay, that's a separate
so obviously you can't compare them since they're not mutually exclusive.
I think that in the case of what you said earlier about there doesn't need to be this whole opposition between families and autistic people themselves, and I don't think that autism is like cerebral palsy because, well, as a neurological difference that affects a lot of aspects of personal behavior and thought, I think that it's an integral part of a lot of people's personhood and self-concept. So I don't think that there's really a fair comparison there. And
Also with cerebral palsy.
Okay, one at a time. Were you finished? Hold on, were you finished?
And I was going to say that I think that it's not really fair at the same time for families, especially parents, to assume that everybody who is advocating for autism is trying to disenfranchise them, because I don't think that's the case. I think that those of us who want to self-advocate should be able to, and the fact that we want to have self-determination and create programs and methods for inclusion that are partly from our own community and take a more first-person perspective on autism rather than a third-person perspective. I don't think there's a problem with that. But I think that a lot of these parents are just so resentful of the fact they have an autistic child, and they're so like caught up in their non-autistic privilege that they just get all resentful, like, oh my God, you need to be cured, shut up, you're not really autistic, go away.
Thank you.
And that just makes me so mad, and it's just, I don't feel like it should be treated that way.
Sometimes I feel the good thing about autism is you're really good at memorizing things and listening, and also you're more aware of people's feelings.
I'm the polar opposite.
Let's see. Yes.
As having lived with somebody with autism on the spectrum for a long time, one thing about the sensory thing is if the person listens slowly, that really impacts day to day.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and for both sides. And so I think that the adults with autism have a legitimate need that needs to be addressed.
I was saying, I remember when I was in a little kid in nursery school, this is before Asperger's is well known. I was in, I think, a nursery school, and I tried to do like an IQ test on me, but I was too distracted by the ladybugs in the ceiling, and I was asking about the ladybugs, and I don't think I even realized they're trying to do some kind of a test with me, and they just gave up. And I think they tried to find out whether or not I was high-functioning autism or something like that, or just a little bit autistic, and they said there's no such thing as being a little bit autistic.
A good model might be the deaf community, because the deaf community is, cohesive and proud, but they would still need supports if they go in the workplace.
What can we do as a SEN? Is there anything, is there some voice? Can we be part of a cohesion of the kind that William is talking about, where we're not at war with people that, frankly, I can understand their thinking about curing some aspects of autism. I may be alone, but at least I can understand that impulse. Can we talk? Can we work with these people? Okay, how can we be constructive out of this instead of, being at war? All right, anybody want to talk to that question? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think when the question gets framed the way it always does, which is, here's the amount of money that the government is giving to autism, then it pits us against each other. What's the word I'm looking for? It's divide and conquer. I would say it forced us against each other. It says, here's the amount of money, and where's it going to go? Is it going to go to these more, quote, quirky type, high-functioning people, or these really severely impacted people? And it creates a false issue. What the real issue is, and how Ascend and all of our work can work together, is that we have to say, no, we're not going to be divided, and we're not going to say this little bit of money is what we're going to be fighting each other over. We're going to have to relegate that to say, no, we're not going to fight against each other. We're going to fight against the people who are keeping all of us from getting any services. We're, getting us, 3 cents on the dollar here instead of 97 cents on the dollar that someone else gets. And that's why framing the question like that is once you look at it that way, you've already lost the battle.
If we saw the autism parent community focus the same kind of emphasis that we see in the broader developmental and intellectual disability parent community around educational inclusion, around access to services, around even things like respite care and family support services that are specifically oriented at meeting the needs of families and dealing with some of the very real stress that families go through, we'd see a very different set of circumstances in the autism community.
PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, is a really good model for how parents can be allies to a marginalized group that don't belong to that group without taking over the movement. So, PFLAG is a group where if you're a parent and you find out your kid is gay and you get really sad and you don't want your kid to be gay, you go to PFLAG and they'll explain to you how it's okay and your kid can still lead a full and happy life, and you just need to be accepting and be there for your child. And then PFLAG also does rights advocacy, so they march in the gay pride parades, they stand in support with the gay community when they have issues that they're facing that they need help with, like political issues, marriage equality, all that. PFLAG supports them. But no one views PFLAG PFLAG as like the voice of the gay rights movement, because they're not gay. It's a group for straight allies who are family and friends of people who are gay. And I wish that parents of autistic people would view themselves more that way, as allies in our struggle for civil rights and not as the ultimate voice of this group.
If we put 1/10 of the amount of money we currently put into genetic research around autism causation into augmentative and alternative communication technology, we would see far more autistic children and adults communicating today. And because communication is at the heart of so many other challenges regarding behavior and a wide variety of other things, that would lead to really significant increases in quality of life for autistic people and our families. So I think the answer to closing this gap between the self-advocate and the parent community is for us to work to try and bring the autism parent community into the broader disability rights movement.
It's important that other people get the same opportunity I got with my parents, where so they loved and accepted me. That meant that if I did something that was weird, or maybe perceived as being weird to other people, that my parents just accepted that as part of who I was. So long as I wasn't hurting someone or hurting myself or stopping anyone or myself from doing something, then that's fine. I could get on with it. So if I want to flap, then I can do that.
My parents have been very supportive of me in terms of getting involved with self-advocacy, but mostly in terms of doing whatever I wanted to do. There were times when they got scared. They were really scared when I was first diagnosed because there wasn't a lot of good information out there. And they were told, you're either saving for college or you're saving for custodial care, and it's a toss-up. So essentially they were told, you might have to institutionalize her, or she might, have opportunities. And they were really scared by that. So they looked for services for me, and some of them were occupational therapy to help with sensory integration, with motor skills, and some of it was, social skills classes and learning to act more normal. But their values generally are that people should be accepted the way that they are. I came out as gay, they were really supportive of that. They believe in people having rights and in people not being bullied or forced to change. So even though they did originally enroll me in some classes, the point of which was to get me to act more like other people do, I think when I told them, I'm done with this, I want to learn to live a good autistic life and not an imitation of a neurotypical life, they were able to see how that was the right thing for me.
We know what happens when we create segregated communities, even if we're well-intentioned, even if the grounds are beautiful, even if parents are worried about their children's futures, that's not the answer. We've spent the last 40 years working on helping people to be integrated into the community and closing institutions, and that work needs to continue. We really need to learn from our history and to make sure that we don't go back to the dark places we've been, where people with disabilities were excluded and neglected and denied opportunities to be their full selves in institutions.
I think at the end of the day, actually, autistic people and parents of autistic children, by and large, want the same things. I mean, if you talk to parents and you ask them, what do you hope for your child? What are your hopes and dreams and aspirations? The vast majority of parents will say things like, well, I want my child to grow up and be happy and to find and hold the job and to have friends and live as independently as possible, and maybe get married and all kinds of other things that I think any parent hopes for their child. Unfortunately, parents in the autism community have been fairly ruthlessly exploited by various groups that have sold this bill of goods that the only way to achieve that is to focus all of the time and the energy and resources of the autism community on this relentless focus on causation and cure. And in reality, that's very much mistaken, and it's the source of some very significant lost opportunities.
I want to go into advocacy, public policy advocacy. I mean, I've thought about working directly with people as a teacher or as a service provider, but I've tried to get some experience working with autistic kids directly to try and teach them, it's okay to be autistic and to think of themselves positively. But in the end, I think their lives are going to be so shaped by the policies and the laws that our country makes about people with disabilities, that, going up and teaching one person is so valuable and so important, but that person's life is still going to be restricted by the unfair policies that they have to face, by discrimination, social stigma, if there's laws that allow them to be institutionalized or allow them to be restrained in school. So I think trying to change those things is really important for me. I'd like to do policy advocacy for a career.
So I serve on the National Council on Disability. It's an independent federal agency, sort of like a government-funded think tank on disability policy issues. We advise Congress and the President and the executive branch on a wide variety of disability issues. We're in an environment where everyone's talking about entitlement reform, and some people are talking about protecting entitlements, and some people are talking about cutting entitlements. But it's very scary because Medicaid is certainly the entitlement that has the weakest level of political support. Social Security and Medicare have the powerful seniors lobby behind them, but Medicaid, which mainly serves poor people and people with disabilities, doesn't have access to that same degree of political cover. So we're working very hard to lay out the case for why we need to protect Medicaid, because the alternative is really decimating our disability services system, and rather than being able to move forward in all the various ways that we need to improve services for people with disabilities in this country, we would be in an environment where we would be moving backward very quickly.
I work in 3 areas. So I have a personal site called squidalicious.com where I've been writing ever since Leo was diagnosed with autism in 2003, and it actually has about 2,600 posts, which some of them I go through, and boy, you can really see how things have changed for me over time. It's been really interesting, and how things have changed for Leo as well. I was a very different person in 2003. I was one of those people coming from outside the disability community who knew nothing, just thought my life was going to be hell, thought Leo's life was going to be hell, and through all the people I've met through that site and the other work that I do, now, I have reached enlightenment, or whatever you'd like to say. I call it understanding, and that's the work that I do, is towards autism understanding. The other 2 areas I work in, I am a contributing editor for parenting kids with special needs at a site called blogger.com, and that's when I get to talk to a more general audience, not just a special needs audience, but a more general audience about the things I've learned and the things I want people to know, and those tend to be more formal articles. I'm also senior editor and one of the co-founders of the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. Our goal is to kind of be a community nexus for autistic people and parents and professionals to learn from each other, and also to get the very best evidence-based information out there about autism science, and also to further autism advocacy and understanding. We have just amazing conversations, especially on our Facebook page, pretty much all day long, every day. We try to post at least 3 articles a day, and it's really, really cool when we have people who say, you know, thank you so much. I did not understand this before. Now I do. I've learned so much thanks to you. And it's because we have this threefold perspective of professionals, autistic people, and parents coming together to learn, as opposed to, you know, trying to tear each other's throats out.
I started Autism Acceptance Day because one year I just got so sick of it. I said, all we do, they have Autism Awareness Month, Autism Speaks comes out with some video or something. That's when they did the I am autism video. And no, we need to not just wait and see what, people would like wait and see what happens, and they would start getting some stomach aches, like, you know, the last week of March, what's going to go on? And I said, no, we have to do something on our own that just isn't a reaction to them.
The thing you can do to help people on the autistic spectrum, you know, is to accept them for who they are. Just like my parents accepted me, my friends accept me, and the people that care about me, they accept me for who I am.
Listen to autistic people, talk to as many of them as possible. Remember that you can do 2 things at the same time. You can accept yourself as okay, and you can work to make your life work better. And I think sometimes, the self-advocacy community is often accused of not wanting to make things better and not wanting, you know, to education. And I don't think that's true to the extent that it's sort of, you know, thrown at us. But you know, it's okay. It's okay to flap your hands, right? And it's okay to not flap your hands when you're at your job.
We really need to learn from our history and to make sure that we don't go back to the dark places we've been, where people with disabilities were excluded and neglected and denied opportunities to be their full selves in institutions.
I'm autistic, I can speak. My voice is different, not weak. And if you listened, you would know my mind's the same. I'm grateful that you don't ignore me, but you cannot speak for me. So let me on your board or change your name. Oh yes, I am odd, and that difference causes pain. That doesn't make you God, that doesn't make you sane. I'm your equal in my humanity. I am smart, I am sensitive, I'm autistic. I'm autistic, I am real. I can think and I can feel. I'm a lover, I'm a husband, I'm a wife. So why'd you hire a muggle who can't understand my struggle to make a horror movie from my life? Oh yes, I am odd, and that difference causes pain. It doesn't make you God, it doesn't make you sane. I'm your equal in my humanity. I am smart, I am sensitive, I'm autistic. I'm autistic, please endure me. Even if you cannot cure me, please don't tell me that my life is yours to take. I'm autistic, please support me. It's too late now to abort me, but there's still time for the difference I can make. Oh yes, I am odd, and that difference causes pain. That doesn't make you God, it doesn't make you sane. I'm your equal in my humanity. I am smart, I am sensitive, I'm autistic. I'm autistic. I'm autistic, yeah. Oh, I'm autistic, I'm autistic. I got a little HFA.